Hey little chickens. Today we're going to talk about block and inline HTML elements, their behaviors and the differences between the two so that you can understand how things tie together when you're writing your HTML. All right, so the first thing is the objective. After this super amazing video, you will understand all the basic behaviors of block level and inline elements for a significantly less frustrating HTML writing experience. Yay. All right, so block level and inline elements, just categorization of HTML elements based on their behaviors. And the writing mode context is horizontal, which means if you read right to left, that's how you expect blocks to behave across your screen. We're not going to be messing with any writing modes today. For the CSS display property, we use block and inline values. However, all HTML elements have default behaviors. You can go to the documentations to see what tags are default block and default inline. All right, a few definitions. Block level elements occupy the entire horizontal space of its parent element or the container and vertical space equal to the height of its contents. Now, this is from the documentation. What that means is that a block level element wants to be the full width of its parent unless otherwise specified. But that's the goal. The default behavior of a block level element is it wants to take up the full width of whatever element it is inside of. The height of a block level element is inherently dictated by the height of its contents. Inline elements, those which only occupy the space bounded by the tags defining the element instead of breaking the flow of content. That's also in the documentation. To me, that definition is a little bit confusing. An inline element, essentially, as long as there's space behind it, another inline element will follow right behind it. And it will keep doing that until it runs out of space, and then it will wrap. Block level element. There are a few things you need to know. One is every block level element has a new line before and after. So as you can see in my examples here, the green one doesn't just fall behind the purple one because it's short and there's space behind it. This is still a block level element, even though the width is defined. So there's a new line, and the next block level element goes down to the next line. Margins between siblings collapse. This is important. If you have two block level elements stacked on top of each other and they both have margins set, the space between those elements is going to be the height of the larger margin. Example 1 has a bottom margin of 20 pixels. Example 2, the blue box, has a top margin of 20 pixels, but the space here is only 20 pixels. To illustrate that further, I have some boxes down here where the bottom margin of the purple box is 20 pixels, but there is no top margin set on this green box. The space between the purple and the green box is the same as the space between the red and the blue. It's 20 pixels. Those margins have collapsed. Okay, so the third thing about block level elements, and we've already discussed a bit, is that if the width is set on a block level element and there's space behind it, the next block level element or the next element is still going to go on a new line. And lastly, we can set a width and height on a block level element. This block level element has a width of 85% and a height of 300 pixels. The width is defined and the height is no longer dictated by the content inside the block level element because it lets us define that height. All right, moving on to inline elements. The first thing about inline elements is essentially its definition. Elements that are inline will lay inline horizontally based on our writing mode, which is horizontal. So as you can see in our first example, all of these elements, as long as there's space behind it, will line up until they run out of room. The standard wrapping, this is the second thing you need to know about inline elements, is that the last element in the row that can fit will break inside the element. It will break the content inside that inline element using white space. As you can see, this red box didn't fit entirely, so it used as much content as it could until it found a good place to break, which happened to be after that comma there at the end. And then it went to the next line, and here we see it just keeps going. So if we don't want that, we have to specify no wrapping in the CSS. So that's example 2. I have styled in no wrapping. Since the element won't fit anymore, it breaks to a new line. Okay, the third point is that top and bottom padding and margins are ignored by siblings and parents. Also going to point out our fourth point, which is that inline elements will respect left and right padding margins. So this is all demonstrated in examples 3, 4, and 5. In example number 3, I have 15 pixel padding set on all these elements. So you can see that the top and the bottom padding get ignored and it looks like they overlap. The content doesn't overlap, but it looks like the element does. But the left and right padding is respected. As you can see that there's space left and right. In example 4, we have just margin set. And again, the siblings aren't respecting each other's top and bottom margin. But to the left and right, there is the 15 pixels of margin. And the total space between the red and the blue is 30 pixels of margin. So the fifth point is that putting a block level element inside of an inline element is not a great idea. Now the documentation says that you can put a block level element inside of an anchor tag, but I don't recommend it because personally I get the same result. But this is this red block is a div inside of a blue inline element. So you can see this blue line here. That was supposed to be an inline element. That's a span with a div inside of it. And the div behaved like it just doesn't care that the inline element is there, and the inline element doesn't even respect that there is a full width element inside of it. So don't do this. And the last point is you cannot set a height or a width to an inline element. So example number 7 here, this green box, I have set the height to 300 pixels and the width to 85%. Clearly, nothing's happening here. Okay, the size of this box is dictated solely on the content. So, don't do that either. All right, little chickens, that's everything you need to know about the behaviors of block and inline elements. Go write some HTML.